If you have not used Teacher Desmos, there is a ton of great resources that are already made. You can always search for an activity. In this case, I would like to make an activity for my students to do. So I'm going to go to Custom, and then I'm going to add a new activity. And what do I want my students to do? We are talking about quadratic curves of best fit. So that's what I'm going to name my activity. And then you have some options here. So I can link it so anyone can see it, which is what I would recommend because it's really nice if you're using other people's activities for them to see yours. Of course, you can make it private. So I'm going to tell them what it is. If somebody searches it, they can know what we're doing. So I'm going to create the activity. So in this activity, I want my students to take a set of points that I provide them. I want them to take those points and then create a table with it and then give me the curve of best fit and make a prediction. I'm also going to ask my students to recall previous information. So I want them to be able to tell me if there are x-intercepts, root solutions, or zeros. I think it's important to tie in previous information as we do current information. So I'm going to add some questions in. So the first thing I'm going to do when this loads is I'm going to drag a graph over. And you will notice there are two different options for dragging a graph over. So I have the option here for this graph. And if I drag this graph over, my students cannot interact with it. So I want my students to be able to interact. So I'm going to pick this graph down here and I will drag it over. So once I have this graph, I can add my title or the instructions that I want my students. And then I can put information in these boxes. So I'm just going to call this graph 1 because I'm going to type all the information I want my students to know in the sheet. I don't want them looking back and forth. So up here under plus sign, I'm going to add a note and I'm going to tell my students exactly what I want them to do. So I told my students exactly what I want them to do. So use the points to find the curve of best fit. So now for my students, what they will do is they will come up, they will click the plus sign, they'll pick a table and put in the points that I provided them. And from there, they will need to format Desmos to give them the curve of best fit. And if you're not sure how to do that with your students, I'm going to show you how to insert one of those. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a note sheet so that I can talk to my students about it. So I click the plus sign, I'm going to add a note sheet. And this is where I would tell my students what I want them to know about the activity. So on their note sheet, I'm just helping them recall previous information. So quadratic curve of best fit, I want them to recall our standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So for my students, they know that means that standard form means it's in order from highest exponent to lowest exponent, and that it's equal to 0 or equal to y. Then I want them to also know that when they use Desmos, we're talking about best fit, which means that it is not perfect. So instead of an equal sign, that I have to trade out the equal sign for the tilde mark. So I will go through and I will add in all the pieces that I want, and then I will hit publish and I will show you what happens. So I have added everything I want. I have a notes page in the beginning. I have 3 pictures where they're going to be creating tables, giving me information, and then telling me does it have any roots, and then explaining why they know that. So now that I'm done, I'm going to click publish. And the nice thing about this is I can push this to students by giving them a code. I can share my screen. The way that I prefer to do it, because we are all virtual right now, is I prefer to take and copy the link. I put it in the chat and then the kids can sign in. So the super awesome part about doing a Desmos activity is that I can see what the students are doing as they do it. And I really enjoy this part because I can pause the class, and if somebody's doing a really excellent job or a really unique way of solving a problem, I can pause the class, share their screen. Everyone is looking at their screen. They're stopping what they're doing, and we can talk about why what they're doing is right or what we would do differently. And this has been great with graphing because some of my students approach graphing by finding the slope and plotting those points first. Other students approach it by actually using the equation. So this is really super great with that. So what I can do here is I can click assign, and I'm going to click the drop down. I'm going to do a single session code. And so when I do this down here, I have this information. So this is the code I could give the students. And if I click, I can get the student link. When I go to view dashboard, the nice part is here's where all my students would appear. So I would be able to see what all my students are doing in live time as they do it. So I would just copy this link and give it to the students. If you're sharing your screen, you could share this. I find that it's too much for them to do Zoom and this. So if I just copy the link, then they can just go straight there. So cool thing is, if I want to present screens or I want my students to see, like when we're in the hybrid, I can make them anonymous, which changes and gives them all random names. I can pause the class, which has all the students stop. It doesn't let them do anything on their screen. And then if I wanted to, I would have student options here, and I could click on a student's screen and make them the presenter. So this is a really cool way to do an activity with students.